let's compare the careers of Tim Duncan and the late Kobe Bryant. Duncan and Kobe both won 5 championships, though Duncan has the edge in finals MVPs. Duncan also has 2 league MVPs compared to Kobe's 1. Obviously, 2 of the best ever. Stephen A., I'll start with you here. But who had the better career?
Oh, believe it or not, I have to say Tim Duncan, with all due respect to my man Kobe Bryant. I mean, when you consider the model of consistency that Tim Duncan was able to put forth, then David Robinson has a title because of Tim Duncan. Tim Duncan is a 5-time champion. As that chart just showed, just as many titles as Kobe Bryant, more NBA Finals MVPs. You got to take that into consideration. The fact that he is universally recognized as the greatest power forward to have ever played the game. Was a 10-time, all-defensive first-team player. You consider the level of consistency that he had. One could give Kobe credit for overcoming adversity, but you got to give credit for Tim Duncan for avoiding adversity because he just went out and played the game and played it at a championship level and was an absolute model of consistency. And so when I look at career-wise, and of course, if I'm an individual and I take into account box office appeal and stuff like that, that would never be Tim Duncan. But when you just look at his performance on the basketball court and the way his play elevated come postseason time, he was actually better in the postseason than he was during the regular season, along with the fact that he accomplished virtually every single thing that Kobe Bryant accomplished without the adversity. I have to give credit where credit is due and just say that Tim Duncan, from the time he came into the league, was that dude. And I have to say that he had actually a better career.
Tim Duncan is easily the greatest power forward of all time. And he's for sure close with Kobe. Their careers are similar. They paralleled each other in many ways, although in very different styles. And so it's not, I'm saying, Stephen A., like this is an easy call. But if push comes to shove and you say who had the greater career, I have to go Kobe Bryant. Charles Barkley's right. Kobe Bryant is the closest thing we've ever seen to Michael Jordan. Stephen, I remember early on doing radio in New York City when, before Kobe was really acknowledged on the Magic Bird level by a lot of people, I used to argue with callers and hold on a second, because Kobe's obviously a national figure his entire career. Offensively, he's the equivalent of Magic or Bird, and defensively, he's better. I mean, how much more is there? Offense and defense. Well, you could say, well, the effect the guy has on a team. But whatever you want to say about that, and Kobe could have at times a deleterious effect on a team depending on the composition of the team, he won 5 championships. 5. And proved after Shaq as the second banana, but just barely. It was 1 and 1A or 1A and 1B. That he could be the lead guy on a championship team. When you look back at those Lakers teams, they were very good, and no question they were perceived as better than the other teams in the league at the time. Pau Gasol has become an underrated player. But it's not like you're bowled over, oh my God, look at that roster. One of the reasons they were perceived the way they were, the primary reason, is Kobe was perceived as the best player in the game. And by the way, Tim Duncan was in the game back then and in his prime. So really, for me, what it comes down to, Stephen A., is when you have 2 guys, their careers are comparable. Kobe made 3 more All-Star games. Tim Duncan has 1 more Finals MVP, all that. But they're comparable. My question is, who hit the higher peak? Who hit the higher height? And Kobe Bryant, to me, did. Other than Michael Jordan, the greatest 2-guard of all time. And by the way, were it not for Michael Jordan, easily the greatest 2-guard of all time. He has the misfortune of the guy who is clearly the best ever in any sport playing the same position he did.
Well, listen, I don't view it that way, and the reason I don't view it that way is I don't think you can take anything away from Tim Duncan, and I'm not accusing you of trying. I think the important point to point out is that, again, we have to understand that when Kobe won those 3 first titles, there's a reason he wanted to separate from Shaq, because Shaq was the most dominant force that we had seen in virtually our lifetime. The only thing comparable to him was Wilt Chamberlain in terms of sheer dominance. He was that mammoth of a man, and he was just an unstoppable, formidable force that nobody could match up with. Kobe was that sidekick, and Kobe did not want to be that sidekick. So he had to separate from Shaq in order to prove that he wasn't that sidekick, because ultimately you were going to be a sidekick if Shaquille O'Neal was your teammate at that particular moment in time. Then we got to think about the years of adversity that they went through, how the Lakers stunk up the joint once Shaq was gone, how they struggled, how Kobe ultimately demanded to be traded before ultimately Mitch Kupchak was able to pull off the heist that landed Pau Gasol for Kwame Brown. That's what transpired. So after that, then they go back to 3 titles, and we see the greatness of Kobe Bryant. Not that we ever denied or was oblivious to the fact that it was there. But the reality is Tim Duncan comes into the league. We're looking at David Robinson at the time, wondering if David Robinson is ever going to win a championship. Rick Pitino is sitting there, famous for the soundbite. Kevin McHale's not walking through that door. Larry Bird is not walking through that door. Robert Parrish is not walking through that door because they were sticking up the joint in an effort to try and get Tim Duncan with the #1 pick in the draft that ultimately went to the San Antonio Spurs. And throughout that history, you had David Robinson. He had a title. Manu Ginobili had a title. Tony Parker had a title. Patty Mills, Steven Jackson. The list goes on and on. None of that happens without Tim Duncan, who was a model of consistency. He had Greg Popovich there as well. Greg Popovich will tell you, the greatness of Tim Duncan also can be attributed to the fact that he allowed him to coach him. Okay, all of those things, you look at it, and there's just no doubt in my mind that, again, you talk about a ceiling or whatever the case may be. There was no dips with Tim Duncan. It was consistent elevation.
Yeah, I mean, but Shaq didn't have a title till he got with Kobe. When he had played with Penny Hardaway and Horace Grant and Nick Anderson, they had a squad in Orlando, and he didn't win a championship till he got with Kobe and Phil Jackson. Stephen A., it takes a lot to win a championship. Tim Duncan has 5. And by the way, my former colleague at HBO, Stephen A., Jim Lampley, who's broadcast everything called football games, he's covered college basketball, all those things, used to tell me the closest thing he'd seen to Bill Russell was Tim Duncan. So when you think about, like, Kobe, we're talking about like a Jordan clone, and in Tim Duncan, a guy who's a lot like Bill Russell, who that was the argument once upon a time, the 2 greatest ever.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.